this just a little bit differently in that before we write the input height, the input weight, input height or input weight, each one of those could have two possible error conditions. I put something non-numeric in, or I put something out of range in. Does that make sense to all of you? Those for each one of those, so that's two things that could go wrong for each, so that's a possible four things. We're going to write a simple routine down near the bottom, right underneath calculate BMI status. We're going to write another routine that literally is only a line or two long. That's going to handle all four of those conditions. So I'm going to type in private void, and I'm going to just call this print message box. Maybe that's not a great name, but it's what I'm going to call it. And I'm going to pass in a string that's going to be text. Oops, that should be a little less. And another string that's going to be the title. Okay, we're going to go over all of this in just a minute, so if it doesn't make sense to you, don't worry about it. So message box dot show text title. Come on. Buttons.ok and message box icon.error. This is the whole routine right here in blue. So write that in, and then I will explain to you what's happening in the entire thing. So just put in those 4 or 5 lines, whatever it is. That is correct. I hope that makes it easier. Pumped up the size a little bit. Now this gives me a chance to mention this to you also. Please look up on the screen. C# has both string with a capital S and string with a lowercase s. Some of you, when you did your test, and I did not take off for it, use string with the uppercase s. Don't use that. That we will get into when we get into chapter 12 and stuff, and we talk about classes. The string we want to use is a lowercase s. What this routine here says is when we call this routine, we're going to have to pass it in a string, and that's going to be the text that's going to appear inside of that message box. And we're also going to pass it in a string, and that's going to be the title of the message box. So we will either, for our title, for example, we're either going to have non-numeric height, non-numeric weight, out of range height, or out of range weight. That's going to be the title. It's going to be one of those 4 titles. And the text will be pretty much the same thing. All right. Now, I wasn't going to do it this way, but since we're right down here anyway, let's write the display all routine, because it's only 5 lines of code. So let's just write this. It won't work right now because we don't have anything to display. All right, but we can put it in anyway. So I'm going to say here text box height dot text equals, and again, don't worry, height dot toString text box weight dot text equals weight dot toString text box. In fact, it's only 4 lines. BMI dot text equals, this we're going to say BMI to string, but we're going to say N2 here, which means that we want it to be 2 decimal places. In fact, I don't know why I said N2. It should be F2. We want that to be 2 decimal places. And then finally, text box status dot text equals the status, which is already a string. What did I call that? BMI status. Okay, that's all of that. So literally now we've got 4 routines to write. Input height, input weight, figure out the BMI, figure out the BMI status. Does that make sense to everyone? I'm doing this a little ass backwards, not on purpose and not to confuse anyone. But for instance, this calculate BMI, that's literally one line. That line right there is one line. So we'll do that in just a bit. This is going to be a bunch of if statements that says if your BMI is less than 18, your status is underweight, etc. Does that make sense to everybody? But let's input the height and input the weight first. So right now we've just got return true, which is wrong. We don't want to return true because if it's an invalid height, we don't want to return that. We don't want to allow that to happen. All right. So I'm going to literally take where I've got the return true. I'll keep it in there because otherwise my program might blow up. And what I mean is I'm going to get errors. Now I won't get any errors. All right. So very similar to what we did last time. String HSTR equals nothing. And I'm going to say this is the height as a string. Bool is height numeric equals true. All right. And we'll just call this numeric height flag. I don't know. All right. Now, by now, you should all understand that the reason that those are green, those are warnings that we've created 2 variables that we're not using. In fact, if we put our mouse over them and I choose show potential fixes, one of the fixes will be to remove them. You don't want to do that. But the reason that that's important is sometimes you create, as a programmer, you create a bunch of different variables and you don't end up using all of them. All right? So that's a quick way that you can get rid of them. Okay? All right. So, again, this is going to be very similar to what we did last time. Now, look on the screen, please. This HSTR, this thing, see this? This thing is going to hold what's in here. Does that make sense? In just a couple minutes, we're going to make one called WSTR, and that's going to hold what's in here. Does that make sense to everybody? All right. The reason I'm telling you that is now what I want to do is technically, it's totally fine to do this. But if I wanted to, I didn't even have, when I created it, I could have just said HSTR equals text box height dot text. That's what we want to put in there. That you can type that in. But the point is, if you look on the screen, technically, I could have taken and said string HTR, instead of setting it equal to the empty string, I could have set it equal to that right away. All right. And some people will say that what I did was superfluous. In other words, it was text that you really didn't need. All right. Back when I was your age and I was doing this stuff, this is the way the instructor had us. I mean, basically, he bore this into our skulls. Create the variable, initialize it to the empty string if it's a string, to 0 if it's a number, then set it. All right. And that's something I've just done over time. All right. So the next thing we want to do is we want to verify that the inputted height was indeed a numeric value. Now, you may remember this from last time when we did this with the console, but we wrote a real small routine called isNumeric. We're going to write that routine again. All right. Now, I'm going to put this down. I'm going to get an error message. All right. If you look up on the screen here, right here at this line, I'm getting an error. Somebody tell me why I'm getting the error. It's right. This routine that I'm calling does not yet exist. So I'm trying to call something that isn't there. That's different than the green that we saw up above, because that was a warning. That's just letting us know we got something that we don't really need there. This is letting us know that if we try to run the program now, we're going to get an error. And if I look down here, this is my error window down here, and it says method name expected. And if I double click there, it's letting me know. It's expecting there to be a method by that name. Now, this is my question for you. I'm going to write that method. Can somebody tell me what type of variable must that method return and why? Yes. A Boolean. Why?
Because the isNumeric is a Boolean.
Perfect. Yeah, because we're putting it into isNumeric. So it has to return true if it is a number, and it'll return false if it's not a number. Does that make sense? And if it returns false, look up on the screen. Guess what we're going to do? We're going to call this routine and give it our message. And then we're done with this. All right? Because there's not much else we can do. We can give them the error message, and then boom, we'll send them back. All right? Now, so we've got input height. We've got input weight. And both input height and input weight, both of them are going to be calling this isNumeric function. Did you hear me? They're both going to be calling it. So, and it's very short. It's about 6 lines, 7 lines. I'm going to put it below the input weight. You don't have, again, you can put your stuff in any order, but I like it to try to make it as easy as possible for me to find where I put things. So here's my input height that's by no means done. There's my input weight, but under my input weight, I'm going to put a comment here that's going to say function to test whether the input passed in is numeric or not. All right. Private bool is numeric, and I'm going to pass it. I'm just going to call it input. Call it anything you want. And what do we got? Return, oops, sorry. Int test equals 0. Return int dot try parse input out test. That's it. That's the whole routine right there. So go ahead and put that in, because I want to explain. I don't think I really did a good job of this last time. So I want to explain what's exactly what's happening in there. All right. I put this right below input weight. Where you put it is really irrelevant. You put, like I said, I put stuff in order so it's easier for me to find what's what and where it is. All right. Now, I want you to see something, so if you'd stop for a second, just look up on the screen. Notice, oh, this should have just, I did the same darn thing last time. This should have been isNumeric right here. I don't know why I did that. I did it last time too. Isheight numeric, make sure you change that to isNumeric. All right, but I would have had an error there anyway because it would have looked for a routine called isNumeric that doesn't exist. Since it now exists, I'm not getting the error there anymore. Please make sure in your input height routine, where we've got the comment that says, verify that the inputted height was indeed a numeric value. Have it say is height numeric equals is numeric, not is height numeric. That was stupid on your instructor's part. All right, and what this does, first of all, notice when I passed it in, I called it HSTR. See that? That's what's called an actual parameter. That's its name. All right, for instance, if that was my name, it would be Jeff type of thing. All right, in here, this is what's called its formal name. Formal is really a bad name because what the actual name and the formal name don't have to be the same. Could I have called this HSTR? The answer is yes. But I'm going to call it from here, and I'm going to pass it in WSTR. And I thought that would be confusing. So I just called it input. All right? And what this is saying is try to take that value that I put in there, all right, that number that I put in as input, and attempt to parse it or convert it to an integer. If you can do it, test is going to end up being set to 1, which means true. If you cannot do it, test is going to end up being set to false. All right? So it will return true if indeed it was a number. Now, we're not checking to see if it's within range now. We're just checking to see if it's a number. So if this returns true, look on the screen here, if I get down to here, if I get down to that point and it's returned true, I entered a number. I don't know yet whether or not that number is valid. That I'm going to check later. But I'm just telling you, I now know that that is a number. Does that make sense to all of you? So if it doesn't, please ask. All right. Oh, where am I here? There we are, input height. Okay, so I'm going back up to input height. Now I just called this routine right here. Now I'm going to put another comment in here that says, if the inputted height was not numeric, in other words, that means i.e. is numeric returned false. So if that's the case, what do I want to do? All right, I like to just tell you exactly what I'm going to do. All right, so that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to put it over 4 lines. Number 1, I want to print out an error message box. That's first thing. Second, I want to clear out the current height text box contents. Third, in fact, there's 3 things I want to do. I want to set the focus to this text box. All right. And then finally, I guess there is 4. 4, I want to return false. All right, we're going to do all those in just a minute, but I want to make sure you understand that. This is saying if I put in a bad value. So if I leave it blank, or I put in a value that's non-numeric, so I put hello in there, or since this is an int, if I put a decimal place in there, that's also illegal here. So if I do one of those things, what am I going to do? I'm going to print out an error message. I'm going to clear out that text box contents. You know how to do that. That's just setting an equal to double quote, double quote. I'm going to set the focus. So that'll be just the name of the control dot focus. And I'm going to return false, which is just return false. All right. So I'm going to say here if. Now notice not is height numeric. Remember, This is a shortcut for if is height numeric equal false. Those two things mean exactly the same thing. Those two things are exactly the same. I like the first one. If the first one doesn't make sense to you, use the second one. And now I'm going to do all four of these things. Make sense? So the first thing I want to do is call that routine that we just wrote a couple minutes ago called print message box. That's going to print our error. So I'm going to call print message box. All right. And what do I need to do? I need to provide it some text. The inputted value was not numeric. Now I'm going to make this a little smaller, otherwise you're not going to be able to read all of it. All right. And I'm going to put a plus sign here, and I'm going to keep going on to the next line. You must enter a value between 12 and 96. \n. Make that a little smaller. All right. Non-numeric height inputted. Semicolon. All right. That's just the first of those four things that we want to do right there. So go ahead and put that in. And then we'll put in the other three lines. You're putting this, you just made that call to is height numeric equal is numeric. Then we put that comment there that we wanted to do these four things if it wasn't numeric. So we're putting them, this is the first of the four that we're putting right there. Now, what should make sense to you is this is going to bring up, create, whatever you want to say. This is going to create for us a message box right here. And that message box is going to have the text in here. The inputted value was not numeric. Then on the next line, it'll say, you must enter a value between 12 and 96. All right. Also, it's going to have an icon that looks like this. That's an error icon right there. All right. And finally, the title of it is going to be up here, non-numeric height. I guess that's all in caps. Non-numeric height input.
You mean error message or is height numeric saying it doesn't exist?
Well, then what you have to do, this is going to say okay down here. That means that down at the bottom where we wrote that routine, make sure that you spelled it exactly the same down on the bottom as you spelled it up here. And the caseness has to be the same. So
this is where
it's down near the very bottom where we wrote our own routine.
where private pool is somewhere.
No, down further. There. Print message box.
Oh.
No, what I'm telling you is that's the routine you're going to call from up here. And you have to call it just like that. Since you put it all in lowercase, you've got to call it all in lowercase. All right? Now you lost that spell there. No, you don't want it there. You don't want it in is numeric. It is inside of the input height. I'm gonna go back down. Go back down to your is numeric routine and make sure it looks like this. I'll go right back for the rest of you. I'll go back in just a second. Your is numeric should, Adam, should look just like this. You got it?
Out space test.
Yeah, out followed by a space and then the word test. That word test is this word test here. So again, then going back to our input height, what are we doing? We're assigning the value that's in the text box currently to HSTR. Then we're trying to verify that indeed it's numeric. If it's not numeric, we're doing this right here. We're going to print a message box, and that's the first thing. Second, it said we're supposed to clear out the contents. So height text dot, what do we call that? Text box height dot text equals nothing. That's the second thing. Third thing, we want to set the focus. Text box height dot focus.
Still not letting me do the snake.
And finally, okay, just so 1 second. Finally, we return false. All right. Those 4 things that you see right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, are these 4 things that are right here. That's why I put the comments in there so you can see exactly what's going on.
It's not even
Yeah, there's some other stuff that's up there. I don't know how, but you must have missed that, so I'll put that up in just a second. You're missing this variable right here. So let me put that back up. And like I said, if you do fall behind, anybody who wants a hard copy, if yours doesn't work when we get it all done, I'll print out a hard copy when we're done. All right? I mean, this is definitely the hardest thing we've done so far, because when we get done, it's close to 300 lines with all the comments and stuff that's in there. Did you get that?
yeah, I put it in weight instead of height, so that's what
I got you. Okay. Well, we're going to put it in a wait in just a couple minutes. Now, I got a question for all of you. Look on the screen if you would, please. You see this? We're going to put an else in there. Just don't even type it yet, but we're going to put in here else, and we're going to put some code in here. If I get down to this else, what does it mean in English? What does it mean?
If not this, then that.
Yeah, but what I'm saying, you're correct, but if I get into this code, what does it mean in the context of this program?
That means that the height was numeric.
That's right. We don't know if it was valid yet, but we know it was a number. It didn't fail that it was no input. It didn't fail because it was string input. It didn't fail because we put a decimal place in it. But we could have put a gazillion in there. In other words, we could have put a 1 and 57 zeros. That's still considered, or negative 3,000. Both those would be considered a valid height right now. Does that make sense? So we've got to check for that. All right. So since we know now the height inputted was numeric, so I'm going to say height equal convert dot toInt32 text box height. No, I'm sorry. We don't even have to do that. We already have a height string. All right. It won't blow up now. It can't blow up because it must be an integer. because we handled that previously. We've already handled it, but now we got to check to see if it's within range. All right, so give me just a second. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to steal my comment. So I'm going to steal that comment and I'm going to put it right here. So now I'm going to say if it was not within the valid range, and what's the valid range? That means either we put in a number that's less than 12 or we put in a number that's greater than 96. Does that make sense to everybody? So if that's the case, we want to print out an error message. We want to clear out the height text box. We want to set the focus. And we want to return true. Does that sound familiar? We want to basically do everything we did up here, except we're going to change the message. So I'm going to grab this code that's in here, and I'm going to put it in down here. But before this is what I want to do, but I want to check the condition first. So if the height we put in is less than the minimum height, or the height we put in was greater than the maximum height, and again, please look on the screen. You may or may not be able to tell, but technically, when I first put these in, a couple of these parens came out gray. And that's because technically I don't need to put in as many as I did. I do it for it because it makes it easier for me to understand. All right, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. All right. And now I'm going to put this in. But what's different? It's not non-numeric anymore. Everybody hear me? I don't want to say it was not numeric. I'm going to say here was out of range. And this will say out of range. You see the difference between those two? Now there's ways that we could streamline this that we haven't done yet, but that's okay. But this is now going to handle. So if you look on the screen here, everybody, okay? If I get down to here, if I get down to this point right here, there's no else. I could put one in, but there's no sense in putting one in. If I get down to that point, from what Gabriel said before, and he was right, that now it's a valid height. So we just return true. That's all we got to do. But do not return true inside of these curlies, because you've already returned false. And, you know, sometimes when people hear this, it's like, no, you're just confusing the hell out of me. All we're saying is this. Look on the screen. Is the number, we put something in here. That's what we're checking. The first if says, hey, if we put nothing in there or we put something non-numeric, just don't accept it. Give us an error and don't accept it. This second one is saying if we put a value in there that was less than 12, or we put a value in there that was greater than 96, don't accept that either. All right? In both those cases, we're just going to print out an error message and return false. If we get down to here, we did put in a number between 12 and 96, so we're just going to return true. All right? And when you get done and you're happy with this, if yours looks okay, look on the screen, please. If yours looks okay, then you can go right up to the top of this, copy every bit of the routine, every bit. All right, now it's giving me an error on a return. Not sure why. Right here. It says unreachable code. Oh, I've got it. I already put remember that return true we put in there at the beginning? Yeah. That was why I was getting that. But what I'm telling you is now I can grab every bit of code between these curly braces, copy it to the clipboard, and put it under input weight. But I'm going to have to go in there myself and change all of those H is for height to W is for weight. All right? So I'm going to quickly go through and do that. So there's the input weight. So I'm going to call it W string. Weight as a string is weight numeric. W string here is weight numeric equals that with W string is weight numeric there. The input value is not numeric. You must enter a value. Now it's between 1 and 777, non-numeric weight inputted. Weight, W, 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 W. I mean, you see what I'm doing here. Less than 1 or greater than 777. Print out an error message, clear out the weight text box, set the focus, return false. W, 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 W. 1, 777 out of range. Weight, weight, weight. So hopefully what you saw by doing that was how similar the height and the weight were. They're virtually identical to one another. All right? So what was our goal here? All right? If you look up on the screen, what do we want to do? We wanted to be able to input the height. Check. We wanted to be able to input the weight. Check. We wanted to calculate the BMI, which we didn't do yet. We'll do that in a minute. That's to do. We want to calculate the BMI status. And we want to display all that stuff. We call it display all. We've done that already. So the only thing we've got left to do is to calculate the BMI and to calculate the BMI status. Does that make sense to everyone? All right. The nice thing is for calculating the BMI, it's literally one line of code. So if you go down to calculate BMI, like I said, it is one line of code. That's it. BMI equals the weight divided by the height squared. Well, I don't know what that did. The weight divided by the height squared, which is math.pow. The height, 2. Times 703. That's the whole thing. If you look up on the screen, that's the whole routine for calculating the BMI. That's it. So the only thing now, so now we've got that one done. So now we calculated the BMI. So the only thing left to do is to calculate the status. That's it. After we calculate the status and you got it working, I'll show you quickly how to change that picture box. All right. And then we'll take another break. And then we're going to, after the break, we're going to go over chapters 4 and 5. And you'll discover we've covered a lot of the information that's in there already. And I realize, you know, I'm giving you a lot to type. And if you're like, yeah, and I don't type well. Well, I'm sorry about that. You know, that's not really something I control. That's only something you can control. I've already mentioned to you that there's that thing called Type Racer. And that'll help you. There's online typing tutors. I'm not trying to go too fast, and I am taping everything. So if you want to go back, plus again, if you want it, I will print out a hard copy for everybody. All right. So let's calculate the BMI status now. In fact, here, I'm just going to put a comment here that says function to calculate the body mass index or BMI using the associated formula, whatever. you don't like that, put in your own comment. It really doesn't matter. And I'm going to put in a comment here too that says calculate the BMI status, i.e. underweight, overweight, or I should say optimal weight, overweight, or obese. All right. Questions on any of that? This routine is 100% exactly with no changes, the same way that we did it in the console app. Did you hear me? It's exactly the same. And the only reason I'm telling you that is I copied it from there. All right. So, but I'm going to type it here. So if the BMI is less than min OPT, so if it's less than, that says if it's less than 18.5, the status, I'm sorry, it's BMI status, is equal to underweight. Underweight. Okay, that's first one. Else, if the BMI is less than the max over, and what this means is if it gets down to here, it's between. So here we're saying, put a comment there, BMI less than 18.5. Here we're saying BMI between 18.5, I'm going to say between. BMI is greater than or equal to 18.5, but less than 25. All right, so if that's the case, they're optimal weight. So the BMI status equals optimal weight. All right. Oops. Else, if the BMI is less than the minimum for obese, then we know the BMI is greater than or equal to 25.0, but less than 30. And that's not obese, it's obese. I guess I cannot spell, can I? There we go. If that's the case, the BMI status is equal to overweight. And you've already seen this. If it's not underweight, if it's not optimal weight, if it's not overweight, you must be obese. That's all that's left. So else BMI status equals obese. And that's the whole routine. Now, I'm going to save it. I'll come right back to it, but I want to run it and see if we made any mistakes. There's no errors down here. That's a good start. So I'm going to run the program, and I'm going to leave this blank. And it comes back, and it says non-numeric height inputted. The inputted height was not numeric. You must enter a value between 12 and 96. That worked. Put me there. I'm going to put in something non-numeric. Again, I get the same message. It clears it out and puts my cursor there. Now I'm going to put in something out of range on the low end. Negative 444. Now I get out of range error. All right, now I'm going to put something on the high end. And again, I get an out of range error. So I'm going to put in 72, but I'm going to leave the weight empty. All right, well, notice it put in 72, so I made a mistake. See that? Someplace I didn't copy. I didn't change my H to a W. So that's why it's wrong. But let's before I do that, get out of here, let's try it and see if 111 should be underweight. It is. Oops, I don't know why it's just setting it equal to that. Well, there's an error in there, so I got to fix that error. Clear works, exit works. But there's an error in my code. So it's less than this, else if it's less than this, else if it's less, that doesn't look like there's an error in there. So I'm in my weight. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Weight. There it is. See it? I didn't change that H to a W. That's why I said you can't, and there I didn't do it either. You know, you've got to go through this slowly if you decide you're going to do copy and paste. I've already found 3 places, 4 places, 3 were in comments. But let's try it one more time. So the height I already checked. That already works. If I leave the weight empty, non-numeric weight inputted. If I put in something that's not numeric, non-numeric weight inputted. If I put in something out of range, 778 out of range weight. If I put in something that's less than 1, out of range weight. That's good. 111, this should give me underweight. It does. 177, this should give me optimal weight, and it does. 200, this should give me overweight, and it does. And 333, this should give me obese, and it does. So everything works. So I very quickly just want to show you how we get that picture in there, and then we'll take another break. All right, and again, anybody who wants a hard copy, I'll print you out a hard copy of that. All right. So the only thing that's left, and you're all going to have to look at this for it to make any sense, okay? What I want to do in here is I want to grab an image file. Are you with me? I want to grab an image file. So what I'm going to do is to grab that image, I grab that from Google Images. All right. Now there are places, you guys heard this last semester, but they weren't here. But there are places that you can go for free images. There's a place called unsplash.com. They've got free images. But what they do ask is if you grab an image, typically they'll have a thing in there, credit given to. You kind of put that in there. And there's another place called Pexels, P-E-X-E-L-S.